Imagine one man born on a small island with no royal blood, no army, and no claim to power rising, to become the most feared and powerful figure in all of Europe. A man who reshaped entire nations, crowned himself emperor, and came within inches of global domination. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Napoleon Bonaparte and how he almost conquered the entire world. But what stopped him? Betrayal? Overconfidence? Or the sheer weight of history itself? Stay with us as we uncover the rise, glory, and downfall of the man who nearly changed the world forever. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most powerful, controversial, and fascinating figures in world history. Born on a small island with no royal title or great wealth, he rose to command armies, crown himself emperor, and almost rule all of Europe. His name strikes awe in military circles and is remembered both for brilliance and destruction. This is the incredible story of how a young boy from Corsica nearly conquered the world and why he ultimately failed. Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, just months after it became a French territory. His family was of minor nobility, but far from wealthy. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, tried to make connections with French officials, which helped young Napoleon get an education in mainland France. Napoleon faced challenges early in life. He was teased for his Corsican accent, poor French, and short stature. But he was a serious student, particularly drawn to mathematics, history, and military studies. Even as a teenager, he was ambitious, intense, and determined to rise above his station. At age 9, Napoleon entered a military academy in France. He was a loner, more interested in reading and studying than socializing. But he showed promise as a soldier and quickly advanced in rank. By 1785, at just 16 years old, he became a second lieutenant in the French army. His career began slowly, but everything changed with the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. The revolution destroyed the old order and opened the door for ambitious young men like Napoleon to rise fast, if they were brave, clever, and ruthless enough. During the revolution, the French army was in turmoil. Officers fled, were executed, or were dismissed. This chaos gave Napoleon the opportunity he had been waiting for. His first major success came in 1793 during the Siege of Toulon. A key French port had been seized by royalists and handed to the British Navy. Napoleon, then just a 24-year-old artillery officer, devised a brilliant plan to retake the port. His success earned him rapid promotion to brigadier general. He'd caught the attention of powerful revolutionaries in Paris. Soon after, he was arrested during a political purge but was released thanks to influential connections. His big break came again in 1795, when royalist forces marched on Paris. Napoleon was given command to defend the city. He famously used artillery to fire grapeshot into the crowd, dispersing them in what became known as the whiff of grapeshot. His brutal but effective strategy saved the government, and he was promoted once more. Now, Napoleon was seen as a savior of the revolution. His reputation as a bold and capable commander was sealed. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the Army of Italy. He was just 26 years old. Many thought he was too young and inexperienced, but he stunned everyone with his victories. The Italian campaign was a masterpiece of speed, surprise, and strategic brilliance. Napoleon's army was poorly supplied and outnumbered, but he moved quickly, divided enemy forces, and defeated them one by one. He used the mountainous terrain to his advantage and showed a deep understanding of morale and momentum. Cities fell one after another. Austria, one of France's major enemies, was forced to make peace. Napoleon returned to France as a hero. His Italian campaign made him a celebrity across Europe. While he was admired by the people, he also began to build his own legend, carefully controlling how his victories were reported in newspapers and sending home looted treasures from Italy. His success made him a threat to the French government, known as the Directory, which feared he might seize power. To keep him occupied and far from Paris, sent him to Egypt in 1798 to disrupt British trade routes and expand French influence in the East. The Egyptian campaign began with a bang. Napoleon captured Alexandria and won the Battle of the Pyramids, defeating the powerful Mamluk warriors. But his fleet was destroyed by British Admiral Horatio Nelson at the Battle of the Nile. Cut off from France, Napoleon faced resistance from the local population and a brutal guerrilla war. Although he tried to promote science and learning in Egypt, bringing scholars and launching archaeological studies, his campaign turned into a disaster. Still, always aware of image, Napoleon abandoned his army and secretly returned to France, claiming victory. Back in France in 1799, the government was weak, corrupt, and losing wars. The economy was failing, and people were hungry for a strong leader. Napoleon seized the moment. With support from allies in the military and government, he launched a coup in November 1799. The government was overthrown, and Napoleon became first consul of the Republic. Though it looked like a republic on paper, real power now rested in his hands. In a few years, he would become dictator in all but name. As first consul, Napoleon introduced wide-ranging reforms. He reorganized the tax system, improved infrastructure, opened public schools, and stabilized the currency. He also made peace with the Catholic Church through the Concordat of 1801, which helped him gain support from religious conservatives. Most importantly, he created the Napoleonic Code, a new legal system that promoted equality before the law, protected private property, and eliminated privileges based on birth. This code became one of his most lasting achievements and influenced laws in countries around the world. But Napoleon was not content with being first consul. In 1804, he made himself Emperor of the French. At his coronation in Paris, he took the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head, a symbolic gesture that said he owed his power to no one but himself. Napoleon claimed he was defending the revolution, but by now he had become a monarch in all but name. Still, many French people supported him. After years of chaos, Napoleon brought order, pride, and glory back to the country. As Emperor, Napoleon launched a series of wars to expand French territory and influence. These conflicts, known as the Napoleonic Wars, would last over a decade and change Europe forever. Napoleon defeated the Austrians at Ulm, and then delivered one of the most famous victories in military history at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, facing both Russian and Austrian forces. He used deception and careful planning to lure them into a trap. The battle ended in a decisive French victory and forced Austria to surrender once again. In 1806, Napoleon crushed the Prussian army at the battles of Jena and Austerlitz. He then turned his attention to Russia, defeating them at the Battle of Friedland in 1807. One by one, Napoleon forced the major powers of Europe to sign peace treaties or become allies. He created the Confederation of the Rhine in Germany, placed family members on the thrones of Italy, Spain, and Holland, and established French control from the Atlantic Ocean to the Russian border. At his peak, Napoleon ruled or influenced nearly every country in continental Europe. Despite all his victories, Napoleon could never defeat Britain. The British Navy ruled the seas and their economy was strong. After failing to invade the island directly, Napoleon decided to wage economic warfare. In 1806, he established the Continental System, a trade blockade that banned European countries from trading with Britain. His goal was to weaken the British economy and force them to make peace. But the plan backfired. Many European countries relied on British goods and ignored the blockade. Smuggling increased, and the policy hurt France and its allies more than Britain. In 1808, Napoleon made another critical mistake in invading Spain, forced the Spanish king to abdicate, and placed his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne. But the Spanish people rose up in revolt. What followed was the brutal Peninsular War, a conflict marked by guerrilla warfare, massacres, and widespread destruction. British forces under the Duke of Wellington arrived to support the Spanish resistance. The war dragged on for years and drained French resources. It became known as the Spanish ulcer, a wound that Napoleon could never heal. Meanwhile, opposition to Napoleon was growing across Europe. Many people began to see him not as a liberator, but as a conqueror. Nationalist movements in Germany, Spain, and Italy pushed back against French rule. Austria, which had been defeated several times, rearmed and joined the fight again. Napoleon managed to defeat the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram in 1809, but the war was becoming harder and more costly. France was overstretched, and its enemies were learning how to fight back. At home, Napoleon continued to tighten his grip on power. He divorced his first wife, Josephine, and married Marie-Louise, an Austrian princess, to create a royal alliance and produce an heir. In 1811, a son, Napoleon II, was born. The emperor now had what he always wanted, a dynasty. But the cracks in his empire were starting to show. Napoleon's downfall began with his decision to invade Russia in 1812. He assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, over 600,000 soldiers from across the continent. He believed a quick victory would force Russia to rejoin the continental system and secure his dominance. But the Russians refused to fight a large battle. Instead, they retreated, burning crops and towns to deny Napoleon supplies. When he finally reached Moscow, he found the city abandoned and on fire. With no shelter and winter approaching, he ordered a retreat. The retreat from Moscow was a disaster. Temperatures dropped, food ran out, and Russian forces attacked constantly. Disease, starvation, and frostbite killed thousands every day. By the time Napoleon's army limped back across the Russian border, only around 100,000 men remained. It was the greatest military disaster of his career. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was shattered. The Russian disaster changed everything. Napoleon's empire, once mighty and feared, suddenly seemed vulnerable. The illusion of unstoppable power was broken. Across Europe, nations that had once bowed to his strength now saw a chance for revenge. The Sixth Coalition and Alliance of Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and other European states formed to bring him down once and for all. They gathered enormous armies, fueled by hatred of French domination, and marched toward the heart of Napoleon's empire. Napoleon, always the brilliant commander, was not ready to give up. Even after losing hundreds of thousands of men in Russia, he quickly raised another army, drawing soldiers from across his territories. Young boys and older men were conscripted into service. He trained them rapidly and led them into battle himself. In 1813, he fought the coalition at several major battles, including the Battle of Dresden, where he managed a surprising victory despite being outnumbered. But his enemies had learned from past defeats. They avoided head-on battles with Napoleon himself, and instead focused on cutting off his resources and destroying his allies. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Leipzig, also called the Battle of Nations. In October 1813, it was the largest battle in European history up to that point, involving over 600,000 troops. Napoleon faced armies from Russia, Austria, Prussia, and Sweden. For several days, the fighting raged in and around the city of Leipzig. Despite his experience and skill, Napoleon was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the enemy forces. His allies began to desert him, and his troops were pushed back. The French suffered a devastating defeat, losing over 70,000 men. The battle marked the end of French domination in Germany. After Leipzig, the French army retreated across the Rhine River. Napoleon's once grand empire was crumbling. Former allies turned against him. The Confederation of the Rhine collapsed, and rebellious uprisings broke out in Italy, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. The coalition armies pressed forward, determined to invade France itself. Napoleon, unwilling to surrender, fought on with courage and skill. In early 1814, he launched a brilliant campaign across northeastern France, winning several small battles against superior forces, but it wasn't enough. The French army was too small and too exhausted. Paris, the capital, was now under direct threat. In March 1814, coalition forces entered Paris. The French government, seeing no other option, surrendered the city. Napoleon rushed to defend it, but was too late. He still hoped to rally his army and fight back, but his generals and political allies had lost faith. Facing pressure from all sides, Napoleon was forced to abdicate the throne on April 6, 1814. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Europe was free from his rule. The victorious allies decided not to execute him. Instead, they exiled him to the small island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. While Napoleon was on Elba, the European powers tried to restore peace. They brought back the Bourbon monarchy in France, putting King Louis XVIII on the throne. Many believed the Napoleonic era was over, but across France, dissatisfaction was growing. People missed the glory, order, and stability Napoleon had brought. The new king was unpopular, and rumors of Napoleon's return began to spread. Napoleon, always alert to opportunity, watched from Elba. He knew his moment would come. In February 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to France. He landed with a small group of supporters, unsure how the French army would respond. But something incredible happened. As he marched toward Paris, soldiers sent to arrest him instead joined his side. One famous story tells how he stood before the army, opened his coat, and shouted, "If you want to kill your emperor, here I am." Instead of firing, they cheered and embraced him. Napoleon's return sparked a wave of excitement across France. People flocked to his side, and King Louis fled. It's like that Napoleon was back in power. This brief period, known as the 100 Days, was Napoleon's last attempt to reclaim his empire. He moved quickly to rebuild his army, strengthen alliances, and prepare for war. But Europe reacted just as fast. The Seventh Coalition, including Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, declared war and mobilized their forces. Napoleon's only hope was to strike first and win a decisive victory before the full coalition could unite. His target was Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were gathering. If he could defeat them quickly, he might break the alliance and force a peace deal. In June 1815, Napoleon led his army into Belgium. He planned to defeat the British under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussians under General Blucher separately before they could join forces. His first success came at the Battle of Ligny, where he defeated the Prussians. But a crucial mistake followed. Instead of pursuing and destroying the Prussian army, he allowed them to retreat. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to the British, who had taken a strong defensive position near the village of Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, would decide Napoleon's fate. The French attacked early, but the battlefield was muddy from heavy rain, slowing their advance. The British, under Wellington's command, held firm. Napoleon launched repeated attacks on their lines, including a massive cavalry charge and an assault by his elite Imperial Guard. Each time, the British held their ground. In the late afternoon, the Prussians arrived, attacking the French flank. Surrounded and outnumbered, the French lines collapsed. Napoleon's army was defeated. After Waterloo, Napoleon fled back to Paris. He hoped to rally support, but the government and army had turned against him. Realizing there was no escape, he abdicated for the second time on June 22, 1815. This time, the British were not taking any chances. They refused to allow him to live in France or on the European mainland. Instead, they sent him to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean, over 1,200 miles from the nearest continent. Here, under constant British guard, Napoleon would spend the rest of his life. St. Helena was a bleak, windswept island, far from everything. Napoleon lived in a damp, uncomfortable house called Longwood. He was constantly monitored by guards, restricted in his movements, and denied contact with much of the outside world. Yet even in exile, he remained active, wrote memoirs, reflected on his life, and tried to shape his legacy. He spoke at length with visitors about his campaigns, his beliefs, and his dreams of a united Europe under his rule. Over time, Napoleon's health began to decline. The harsh climate, isolation, and emotional strain took their toll. He suffered from stomach pains and other illnesses. Some historians believe he died of stomach cancer, while others suspect he may have been slowly poisoned by arsenic. On May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, Napoleon Bonaparte died in exile. His final words were reportedly, "France, Army, head of the army." He was buried on the island, though his remains were later returned to France in 1840 and placed in a grand tomb in Paris. Despite his defeat and exile, Napoleon's legacy lived on. In fact, over time, many began to see him not just as a conqueror, but as a visionary. He had introduced reforms that outlasted his empire. The Napoleonic Code became the basis for modern legal systems in many countries. His promotion of merit over birth, public education, secular government, and civil equality influenced societies long after his death. Even his enemies adopted some of his ideas. In many ways, Napoleon helped shape the modern world. His military tactics are still studied in academies around the globe. He is often considered one of the greatest generals in history, with unmatched ability to read the battlefield, move his troops quickly, and exploit weaknesses in enemy lines. His campaigns, especially in Italy, Austerlitz, and his earlier victories are legendary. But he also made critical mistakes. His arrogance led to overreach. The invasion of Russia and the occupation of Spain drained his resources and turned people against him. His inability to recognize limits ultimately led to his downfall. Napoleon's story is not just about war and power. It's about ambition, talent, and the rise of a man who believed he was destined for greatness. He came closer than anyone in modern history to uniting Europe under a single ruler. At the height of his power, he controlled or influenced over 70 million people. Had he succeeded in defeating Russia or Britain, the map of the world might look completely different today. But his dream of domination proved too ambitious. The very forces he unleashed, nationalism, rebellion, and the desire for self-rule, came back to defeat him. Still, Napoleon's legend remains. Statues of him stand across France and Europe. His name is spoken with admiration and fear. He is remembered as a man who shaped history by sheer force of will. He was a master of politics, propaganda, and war. He inspired loyalty in his troops and terror in his enemies. He was a man of contradictions, both a child of the revolution and a self-crowned emperor, a liberator and a conqueror. In the end, he was human, flawed and brilliant like the empire he built. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769. On the island of Corsica, just months after it had been transferred from Genoese to French control. He came from a modest but noble family. His early life was shaped by the struggle of Corsican identity and the influence of the French educational system. As a child, Napoleon was sent to mainland France for schooling, where he experienced bullying for his accent and background. Despite these hardships, he excelled in mathematics, history, and military strategy. His intelligence and discipline stood out early on. He attended the military academy in Brienne and later the École Militaire in Paris, becoming a second lieutenant of artillery at just 16 years old. The French Revolution, beginning in 1789, transformed France politically and socially, and created the perfect conditions for ambitious individuals to rise through the ranks. Napoleon, still a junior officer, aligned himself with the revolutionaries and quickly caught the attention of powerful political figures. His first major break came in 1793 during the Siege of Toulon, where he led a successful assault that expelled British forces. His performance earned him a promotion to brigadier general at just 24 years old. He continued to rise with ruthless efficiency. In 1795, he put down a royalist uprising in Paris with a whiff of grapeshot, a brutal use of artillery that made him famous and earned him command of the Army of the Interior. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French Army of Italy. Despite poor supplies and low morale, he transformed the ragged troops into a formidable force. His Italian campaign was a masterpiece of military strategy, using speed, surprise, and brilliant tactics to defeat larger Austrian forces. He secured northern Italy for France and forced Austria to the negotiating table. The victories made him a hero in France and the darling of the revolutionary press. Napoleon's fame soared, and he became known as a military genius. He wasn't just a commander, he was a symbol of French power and ambition. This period was also when he began cultivating his public image, using propaganda to portray himself as a savior of the Republic. After the Italian campaign, Napoleon launched an expedition to Egypt in 1798. His goal was to disrupt British trade routes to India and expand French influence in the Middle East. Though he won the Battle of the Pyramids, his navy was destroyed by Admiral Nelson at the Battle of the Nile, trapping his army in Egypt. Despite military challenges, Napoleon brought scientists and scholars along with him, resulting in major cultural discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone. His ability to spin military setbacks into public relations victories kept his reputation intact. When political instability returned to France, Napoleon secretly left his army in Egypt and returned to Paris in 1799. France was again in crisis. The revolutionary government had become weak and unpopular, and the people longed for order and stability. In November 1799, Napoleon took advantage of the chaos by orchestrating a coup known as the 18th Brumaire. With the help of his brother Lucien and key military allies, Napoleon overthrew the Directory and established the consulate, with himself as first consul. Though the new government claimed to preserve revolutionary ideals, power was now concentrated in Napoleon's hands. He quickly reorganized the administration, reformed the tax system, and began creating a centralized and efficient state. Napoleon was no longer just a general, he was now the de facto ruler of France. To solidify his control, Napoleon negotiated peace with France's enemies. The Treaty of 1801 ended hostilities with Austria, and the Treaty of Amiens in 1802 brought temporary peace with Britain. With Europe at rest, Napoleon focused on internal reforms. He established the Napoleonic Code, a unified system of laws that eliminated feudal privileges and established equality before the law. Though it restricted certain freedoms, especially for women, the code remains one of Napoleon's most enduring legacies. He also created the Bank of France, modernized infrastructure, and centralized education. His reforms brought stability to a country that had been racked by a decade of revolution and war. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. By placing the crown on his own head, he sent a powerful message. His authority did not come from the Pope or tradition, but from his own ambition and the will of the people. The Republic was over. France had an emperor again, but this time not from a royal bloodline. Napoleon claimed to defend the revolution's achievements, but he was clearly building a personal empire. Across Europe, his enemies watched with alarm as he consolidated power and prepared for further expansion.